Hello class, Daniel Lewis here. Looking forward to spending some time with you going over the final presentation for our capstone for our PE and exercise science course. I'm going to be presenting for Professor Allstott's class, and my research was on leadership development through sport. And so what I'm going to be talking about with you guys is how coaches have an impact on leadership and in athletics. And so this is inspired. I coach football at the community college level, and I'm definitely passionate about coaching. So this is something that was interested me. And so athletics is an opportunity where coaches get to spend a lot of time with their players. We get to spend days with them where we're going to be with them 3 to 6 hours a day. Sometimes we're on road trips. There's going to be all sorts of opportunities. Sometimes we have classroom time, things of that nature. So being a position of a coach, we're in a position of leadership. And so the purpose of this study and the research that was conducted for this capstone assignment was to look at leadership development and training from coaches given to their players or taught and trained to their players. And so what the purpose of this research and what we were looking for is to be able to explore leadership training and development opportunities and coaches that use leadership and training as a part of their curriculum, or to see how coaches teach and train leadership, and also to determine the value that coaches put on that. So there were some research questions involved, and some of the things that we needed to look at was to see what coaches actually perceived the importance of leadership training, and to see who actually determined that it was something significant. And so those are some of the questions. First needed to establish that. Also needed to establish how do coaches view their impact on leadership. Do coaches see themselves as impacting leadership themselves? So that's going to be another question. Also another research question is to look and see, is athletics a platform where we can teach and train leadership? And so if we're able to teach and train leadership in athletics, coaches obviously get to spend time with their players. And so those are some of the questions observed. And then lastly, we wanted to look at what kind of leadership development programs were actually implemented, or what kind of things coaches do to teach and train leadership. And so where this was sparked, I have a passion for leadership development. It's something that I find important not only in my professional life of coaching, but in my personal life. And so how this comes into play is, as coaches, we are leaders. We spend time with the kids. They look up to us. They see us. And so we have an opportunity for great impact. And great leaders make and create other great leaders. And so that's something that I live by. I see that in other areas in my personal life. I want to help develop other people to be great leaders as well. And so having that kind of motivation, a part of this research is to help encourage and inspire other coaches to have that same mindset. And so part of that is fueled by my faith and my understanding of the Bible, and how I see Jesus as one of the greatest leaders of all time. And how he spent so much time with his disciples, teaching, training, and building them up so that they could carry on his legacy. And I think that's one, and what's really neat is one of the few contexts that we actually use the word disciple in today's language is through coaching, to say that, oh, I'm a Bill Belichick disciple, or I'm a Bill Walsh disciple, and through that coaching tree. And so those are one of the ways. And so what a disciple is a learner. And it's that same thing. You learn from one of the great coaches. You learn from those other people that have had that big impact over the years. So that's one of the areas where I see that nowadays, and that's what's helped spark this. So that's where we're going to look at for the study, for this research study, and we're going to look at some other examples from previous research now that other coaches have looked at. And so the importance of leadership, that's going to lead us into that. And there's life skills that are learned through sport. And so that's what this first research study examined, was to see that by playing sports, athletes are able to learn leadership skills, and other skills that are going to translate outside of athletics. And so we can see the purpose of this study is to research skills that have been developed in athletes. And so what had happened with this is there was a successful high school football program, a soccer team, and they had 12 athletes on the team, and they had a head coach that had a reputation for being a quality head coach. And so they hired a researcher and someone else that was considered to be a coach. And he would, throughout the course of the season, conduct qualitative interviews to find out from the players different qualities and different skills that they've been building and growing in throughout the course of the year. And so the results of this study, as you can see, it shows that the athletes were able to observe leadership qualities from their coach, and they were able to grow in those leadership qualities throughout the course of the season. And also we can see that these leadership skills carried off the field. And so how this can apply to our research is to see that players actually listen to coaches. They see what they're doing. They follow along. They actually observe their coaches in the way they are. And so this is going to be applicable to the final research because it's going to encourage coaches to want to partake and engage in leadership development. Also, it shows that their example is important in that it's seen and that they're going to learn throughout the course of the season. The next research, the next literature review that I looked at in getting ready for this, and it's going to be applicable, is how leadership is going to be able to help mitigate some of the highs and lows, the ups and downs in competition. And so the purpose of this next study was to look at self-efficacy. And what self-efficacy is it's one's ability to control their own mental mindset, to execute control over themselves. And so this research looks at the impact of performance and leadership by both performance and leadership through the peer-to-peer relationships, coach-to-athlete relationships. And so how this was conducted was there was 30 male soccer players, and they were given interviews at the end of the season, and they were asked different questions about performance and what could have helped them perform better. And so that's what a lot of this is about. If coaches aren't going to put in leadership development programs, if they can't see improvement, or they're not going to see results. So that's where this comes into play. And so some of the results of this survey is that they learned a lot about leadership. They learned a lot about the barriers that limit quality leadership. The barriers that, so what they found was there was over 80 barriers. So that's a pretty high number. So future research was going to be called for this one. That's what they were asking for as far as trying to understand better what those barriers are and how to categorize them differently and associate them together. But what they did find is that peer leadership barriers is a cause for limiting performance. So that's going to be important, that when peers can't lead each other, that there's going to be limiting performance for the team. The next research was to look at leadership training outside of sport. This was in the professional field. How this is going to be important is because this plays into looking back at leadership development programs and seeing the success. And that's what this research was all about. It was looking at a early childhood education center. They try to develop leaders, and they put in place a 10-month program. And so this 10-month program is designed to prepare the next generation of leaders, or the next group of leaders that are going to lead early childhood education centers. And so where this study is so important is that it shows both a systematic design, it shows how the program was designed, and it showed the research to look and see, hey, was this successful? So what we can see is the purpose of this was to see, is this 10-month program actually working? And so what they were able to find was that they had a large sample size. They had 138 recent, and then over 500 from previous people that have already finished the classes and went through the program. And what they found was that they were able to learn a significant amount about their own leadership style, because not everyone leads the same way. So they're able to learn about their leadership and the different aspects that they lead based on their personality or their position or wherever they are. So that was one of the results of the study. And it also found that participation in the program was positive as far as their effectiveness in leadership altogether. And so part of the application that we talked about earlier was that you got to be able to look back and see, is the program that you're doing and is the program that you have in place actually successful in doing what it's designed to do? And so that's what's going to be important as far as the last bit of this research is helping coaches to look back at their own research. And so this research design and how it was put into place was to actually look at coaches' leadership programs. And so we asked them about the importance of leadership. And so there was a survey that was designed, and it was sent out to the coaches, and it had demographic and general information questions. It asked about them as a coach and as well about their school and their team. And so it asked questions about win-losses, how their team performed, all of that nature. So all of those were included. That's not included in the published data since that's going to be private. Some of the win-loss records were, but anything about the actual coach themselves was kept out of the final Capstone project. So that wasn't included in the what's going to be disseminated. But what we do have is information of their responses to all the questions as well. And so there was 10 Likert scale questions that were asked. Of those 10 questions, 6 of them were the strongly agree to strongly disagree, and 4 of the questions were least frequently to most frequently. And so they progressed along that line as far as the questioning went. And so each of these questions, we're trying to determine the research questions that we're looking for. And so how the survey went out, at the end as well, there was 2 questions that were qualitative in nature. So they were asking more for a short answer. And so using the 10 Likert scale questions, we were able to analyze them against the actual responses that the coaches wrote in to see and be able to assess the differences. And so the procedure for this, I sent out emails personally to the coaches, had over 200 that I tried to get in touch with, and got 20 and was able to get responses back. And so the participants were head coaches of athletic teams that were actually team-based and not individual-based. So what happened was we ended up getting 25 surveys back. One of them was thrown out because it wasn't a team sport. It was actually an individual sport. So that one was not included in the findings. But the rest of the 24 surveys were gathered. So over 200 emails sent out, not a lot of responses back. We got 24 back, so we're going with what we got and able to work from there. So there were the Likert questions, but we did see some of the 3 of the questions, as you can see on the slide. It shows that all the coaches agreed, and they generally agreed upon 3 main things. And what those were, they agreed that coaches have an impact on leadership. All 24 coaches agreed that athletics is a platform to teach and train leadership, and most coaches agreed that they seek opportunities to learn about leadership themselves so they can pass it on to their athletes. And so this was interesting because one of the meaningful findings from the Likert questions compared to the actual responses was that only 11 of the coaches actually formally teach and train their athletes. And then another 6 of them informally train their athletes. And then lastly, there's 7 that identified that they don't specifically train their athletes as a part of their coaching. And so that's not something that they're going to put in place or emphasize. It may change from year to year, or they don't have any set program, or they're not intentional as far as their leadership development. And so there was also those 2 questions. One of them was analyzed as far as the qualitative questions, and that was the themes for the qualitative question, which was, do you formally teach and train your athletes? And if so, what do you do? And so they were able to respond to that. And from those responses, we were able to see that there's 3 things that we find. Coaches either form a leadership council, there's some form of informal training, or there's the symbiotic leadership training that happens just from observing the coach. But like I said, they don't specifically teach and train their athletes. And so looking at this study, from all of those responses, it was evident that all of the coaches do see athletics as a platform. It is important, and they see the value in leadership training. And so what this comes into is that's supported by some of the literature review. We see the literature review shows that leadership is able to impact the athletic performance. We see that it's able to pass on outside of athletics, and we're able to see that it's able to help mitigate some of the highs and lows. Now, some of the other research, what it showed is that it didn't indicate results as far as performance. We weren't able to there was no significant findings as far as win-loss record and performance and ups and downs and things of that nature. That wasn't associated with it. Or there was no correlation between win-loss record and whether coaches teach and train in leadership or not. So that was one of the findings, and that's going to be significant as to why coaches are going to implement leadership development programs, and that's something to look at. As far as coaches that did implement leadership development programs, one of the themes that we saw is a leadership council. And so how that comes into play, that leadership council is a positive form of leadership training. And that positive form of leadership training is going to have the most impact. There can be negative forms where you can do it on the spot, where your coaches can sometimes be harsh or try and teach kids outside of a formal training, and that's not going to have as significant of impact, and that's supported by research. And so it's good to see that 11 coaches, it's encouraging to see that there are coaches that put into place leadership development programs and training throughout the course of the year, whether it be weekly meetings, where they set up different times where they're going to pass out curriculum. Those are some of the responses that different coaches gave. And so some of the potential reasons for a lack of that leadership development program is just what we talked about. It takes a lot of work to put in and make packets or leadership or set up meetings or organize kids or get them all together. And so there can sometimes be a lack of resources or lack of other coaches to help with this, or time. And so there's a lot of things that can come into play to make it difficult to put in leadership development programs. Also, it could not be a priority for the coach. That could be something where they don't see it as something that they need to put into place. And then another interesting finding, as far as the age and the tenure of coaches that actually were at the program, found that of the 24 coaches, 6 of the coaches have been at their present school for 19 years or longer. And of those programs, only 1 of those coaches formally teaches and trains their athletes in leadership. And so a possible idea of why this might be the case is that coaches that are longer tenured at their school could get a hubris about them and think that they might be the leadership program themselves and that kids need to follow them. That's also supported by the findings from the prior research. We saw one of the coaches, the kids were able to learn from them. So that could be a potential way where the kids are able to learn, but we're not able to determine the effectiveness of that leadership program unless we were to do some research and look back at it. And so in conclusion, a lot of implications here as far as leadership development. And as far as this research and what we found, because coaches do find that leadership development in athletics is a part, and it can be influenced, and that they have influence on their players, that what this means is they have an opportunity to alter the future of their kids. They have an opportunity to help teach and train. It's going to influence them in the classrooms. It'll help them be better students. It'll help them be better leaders so that they can be more effective once they get out and they're no longer playing sports. So that's one of the implications that we're looking at through this study, and something that's a great finding. We'll also find that there's no one-size-fits-all or set, this is the way you need to do leadership. A lot of coaches can do it in different ways. There's not one way that it needs to be done, but the fact that coaches are putting it into place is encouraging to see. And so that's something that we like, and that I was encouraged by. As far as recommendations about running this study again or doing this research, there was a lot learned throughout the course of the term. The survey, implementation, sending things out, getting a sample size. It was very challenging to get a good sample size. It took a lot of time to get responses back from coaches. Sometimes they needed to be resent out multiple times, maybe a phone call or something along those lines to try and get responses from coaches. So that was definitely one of the challenges. So finding a way to get a bigger sample size and how to get responses back from coaches. The online survey, some of the questions and the wording, after looking back and seeing some of the responses, some of the questions were a little bit vague or could have been worded differently, and that would have actually had the coaches respond a little bit more specific to this, to leadership rather than something broad. So one of the questions, for example, asked if they read books about coaching and leadership, and all the coaches responded generally, yeah, frequently we read those. And so it could be observed that that question was a little bit vague and probably needed to be guiding them more specifically towards, do you read books about leadership to pass on to your players or something along those lines? Having a more detailed question would have helped better on that. Also for future recommendations, sometimes we get vague responses. And so with those vague responses, actually having a qualitative follow-up would have been beneficial to have. And so that's some of the findings or recommendations if this study were to be done again. And as far as future research goes, I think that interviewing assistant coaches is going to be another way to get some quality data, and you're going to get more responses as well, especially at the collegiate level, since many of them actually coordinate the leadership training. And then lastly, survey the athletes as far as their development and how they've perceived the leadership training and how much it's helped them. I think that will also be another way to tell the importance and impact of the leadership training programs that are in place. So glad that you guys got to spend some time learning about leadership development. I hope it encourages you, as many of us are all coaches here in this program, to go and implement leadership training as a part of your coaching curriculum. Thanks.